1973, Mount Gambier, the Shaft cave diving accident in southern Australia. On the most tragic day in Australia's cave diving history, 4 family members entered the water together, but only one made it out alive. This is the fatal breakdown of the Shaft cave diving disaster. Christine Millett was far beyond her years in skill. At just 19, she had already spent nearly her entire life in the water. Her father, a professional diver in Australia, had taught his children to dive almost as soon as they could swim. Christine, along with her brothers Stephen and Glenn, were well-trained and deeply experienced divers. By early 1973, all 3 had reached the highest scuba certification available. Christine had even won the New South Wales title in scuba diving. As a group, the Milletts were sharp, confident, and fully prepared for deep diving. Joining them on this trip was their cousin, John Bockerman. He had diving experience too, but only 4 years under his belt. He was considered the least experienced in the group. On May 28, 1973, a total of 9 people had planned a 2-day dive at a sinkhole in Mount Gambier known as Le Shaft. What made this site so unusual was how it looked from the outside. Just a small opening in a grassy field. But that small hole led into a massive hidden cave far below. The entrance had been widened to about 3 feet, just enough for a person to climb down using a rope ladder. Once you squeezed through the tight opening, it opened up to a large lake about 20 feet down. It was surprising to most people that such a tiny hole in the surface could lead into an enormous waterfall cave, roughly the size of a football field. When the sun was out, the light would shine directly through the hole, cutting through the water all the way down to the bottom. The beam stopped at a pile of rocks 120 feet below. That rock pile had formed after the landowners tried to fill the sinkhole years earlier by dropping in hundreds of stones. But instead of filling it, they ended up learning how deep the cavern really was. That pile of rocks and the beam of light that reached it became the central reference points for divers in the cave. It helped them keep track of where they were. As long as you stayed away from the 2 side tunnels branching off the main chamber, you could always see the entrance hole above, sunny or not. On the first day of the dive, all 9 members of the South Pacific Diving Club from New South Wales entered the site. They dropped a single guide line down from the entrance to the top of the rock pile. That was the only safety line they placed that day. 8 of the divers went underwater and explored the main cavern, making it about halfway around the room before finishing the dive. The 9th person stayed at the surface to help manage equipment and watch for safety. Robert Smith, who was the club president, had dived in this shaft more than 20 times. He was very familiar with the cave and felt confident exploring the main chamber. But what Robert didn't realize was that Christine had different plans for day 2. As far as Robert knew, everyone had agreed to stay within the depth of 200 feet. That would keep the group inside the main chamber, where the entrance light could still be seen. No one talked about placing extra guidelines and no formal dive plan was shared. There wasn't a clear group leader and no official buddy system was set up. On the second day, Christine, Steve, John and the other diver named Gordon Roberts had a different goal. They wanted to go deeper into the western tunnel of the cave and reach a depth of 250 feet. Their plan was to dive down quickly, hit the target depth, and then come right back up without staying long. This would set a new record. But this was back in 1973. The deep diving was still very limited. Divers were still using regular air tanks, no special gas mixtures. Things like mixed gases and advanced diving methods hadn't become common yet. That meant divers could only go so deep before the pressure and effects of nitrogen became dangerous. It was already pushing the limits of what was possible at the time, and pushing their own limits too. What none of them fully realized was that cave diving isn't like diving in open water. It brings a whole different set of dangers. Christine, John, Stephen, and Gordon were about to come face to face with those dangers in the worst possible way. The other 4 divers, Glenn, Robert, Larry, and Peter, later shared what they saw and remembered from that day. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. The group entered the water and dropped down to the cave floor, just past the rock pile. But it didn't take long before Robert started to feel strange. He recognized the early signs of nitrogen narcosis, and he needed to go back up to a safer depth. When he dived deeper, The pressure forces nitrogen into your bloodstream, and it can make you feel drunk or confused. It's called nitrogen narcosis, and it's very dangerous, especially when you're inside a dark tunnel deep underwater. After exploring for a bit, Glenn realized his time was almost up. He was just behind Christine and the others. He reached out to tap her on the shoulder to signal that it was time to turn back. But just before he touched her, she and the others suddenly swam forward, going over the ledge at the edge of the chamber. That ledge marked the beginning of the tunnel. Glenn wasn't too worried. He figured they just wanted to have a quick look and would head back up soon. As each diver followed their own plan, some started heading back towards the surface. A few had to make decompression stops on the way back up before they could fully exit the water. One by one, they broke through to the surface. But something was wrong. Only 4 divers came up, and it all happened within about a minute. That set off alarm bells immediately. Everyone had gone in with the same amount of air, and by then, their dive time should have been over. Some of the divers quickly went back down to search for the others. A few even dropped down the ledge into the tunnel. But the only thing they found was Steven's flashlight and his camera sitting on the bottom. It didn't make sense. The missing divers were highly trained. There was still hope. Maybe they have found a pocket of trapped air, or maybe they were stuck, but still alive. No one wanted to believe what was starting to feel more and more likely. What exactly went wrong inside that tunnel? When Christine and the others reached the edge where the tunnel began, they paused to get their bearings. Christine knew they had to move fast, go down, reach the goal, and come right back up. Diving this deep on normal air was risky, and she was well aware of it. She also knew the signs of nitrogen narcosis and had trained herself to stay calm and breathe slowly, even under stress. But the deeper you go, the faster your tanks run out. At 250 feet, each breath uses up to 7 times more air than it does at the surface. Even if everything went perfectly, they would only have a few minutes at that depth before their tanks would run low. Still, Christine felt confident. She had her brother and her cousin with her, and all 3 were experienced. Together, they believed they could handle this dive and break the 250-foot mark. They were seen dropping into the tunnel and heading for the goal, but the tunnel wasn't straight. Starting around 200 feet, it sloped deeper, and to reach that target, they had to swim over 300 feet through a tight, narrow space. Every second they swam forward, the danger around them was growing. As they swam deeper, each of them was likely feeling the effects: low air, mounting pressure, and confusion from narcosis. But even those weren't the biggest threats they faced. The real danger was silt. None of them had experienced this type of tunnel. With 4 divers moving through such tight spaces, their fins stirred up thick layers of salt that had settled undisturbed for years. Within moments, the clear water turned into a cloudy mess of sand and debris. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and you couldn't even see your own hand. This was the turning point. Without a safety line laid out ahead of time, it was impossible to tell which way was back. Christine checked her air and realized that she didn't have enough to reach 250 feet. She turned around, but heading back wasn't as easy as it sounded. The entire tunnel was now filled with swirling silt, and there was no way to tell which direction led to the exit. If it was cloudy outside, the tunnel would be pitch black, no light from the entrance, no visual help. She reached out, feeling for walls or familiar shapes, but it was just random rock. The path back was lost. In her last attempt to find her way, Christine swam upward, hoping to escape the thick cloud of silt near the floor. Gordon did the same. Both of them were now in the upper part of the tunnel, their flashlights cutting through the dark as they searched for anything familiar. But the ceiling wasn't smooth. Jagged rocks stuck out in all directions, and instead of leading them out, the passage trapped them in. Unknowingly, Christine and Gordon had entered a false dome, a pocket in the tunnel that felt like it could lead somewhere, but didn't. Inside that dome, they spun in circles, reaching around the walls, trying to find an exit, but all they could feel were sharp rocks and dead ends. There was no way to know which way was up, down, or back. The water around them stayed cloudy. The tunnel's entrance light couldn't reach them here, and while they searched in panic, their air tanks were emptying. Tiny air bubbles collected in cracks above them, but it wasn't enough to breathe. The harder they worked to escape, the faster they used up the last of their oxygen. In the end, they ran out of air together, and their bodies sank to the floor of the tunnel. While Christine and Gordon were trapped above, John was swimming in a different direction, deeper into the tunnel. Witnesses said he moved quickly like he had a goal, but the way he was swimming suggested something was wrong. He was likely deep in the grips of nitrogen narcosis, disorientated but unaware. Stephen had also turned back, but he had gone further than Christine and Gordon before realizing it was time to leave. Now, he too was struggling. Like then, he had no guidelines and couldn't see through the stirred-up silt. His air was almost gone, and he was trying to find a way out in complete darkness. When search teams later found Steedham, his buoyancy vest was fully inflated. That meant he had tried one last emergency move, filling his vest to shoot himself forward towards the surface. But something stopped him. His body was tangled near a rock ledge. The rocks had trapped him, and he never made it out. Despite desperate searches by the other divers and later by police, it took more than 11 months before the bodies of the 4 divers were finally found and brought back. It was hard to believe. They weren't beginners or careless thrill seekers. They were some of the most qualified scuba divers in Australia. Yet even with all their training, experience, and confidence, the Shaft claimed their lives. The dive started with excitement, a clear plan in mind, and strong swimmers leading the way. But cave diving is unforgiving. One mistake, like entering a tunnel without a safety line, can turn a normal dive into a disaster. In the end, it wasn't just depth or air that killed them. It was poor visibility, confusion, and panic in an environment when there's no room for error. The Shaft still existed, and remained one of the most mysterious and dangerous cave systems in the country. Divers now enter it with strict safety rules and advanced equipment. But the lesson from May 28, 1973 will never be forgotten. 4 family members went down into the earth. Only one ever saw the surface again.